This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself, and I learned at a young age to keep my head down and not go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. Never any issues, until one evening. One evening, I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I hear a knock on my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted out, "Who is it?" But there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said,
"It's Tom."
I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said,
"You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk."
I went over to the peephole, and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Fuck off, or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away, and I heard the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window, and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called my landlord, who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come check things out. I called the police and tell them what's going on. They said a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch out my window and see them approach Tall Dude. Tall Dude takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother try to chase him, but Tall Dude got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I give my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who has been S.A.ing women. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when Tall Dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So, Tall Creepy Dude from the bar, it was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never see you again. Hi. So I've never really posted to Reddit before, but this is a story I always think is my worst experience as a woman. Now, I know I'm lucky as I have not got much trauma from the opposite sex, since I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere, which was pretty safe, but I moved to a city a few hours away a couple of years ago, so I've realized how naive I am. I'm going to try to leave out a few details since I don't want the other person involved to realize what I'm talking about if they happen to see this, so sorry if I end up being a bit vague. So not long after I moved here, me and a friend had to go to the shop for food. It was a normal shopping trip, nothing out of the ordinary. It was still winter, but we didn't go out late, so it was still bright when we were walking back home, and the trip wasn't very far, and neither of us had a car, so we would always walk there. On the way back, we crossed the road as per usual to head up our road, and we see a man in a high-vis vest. He was probably about 5'7". I'm quite tall, so tend to be all right at guessing heights, and maybe late 40s, late 50s, and wasn't particularly built. Like not thin, but not muscular, just your standard middle-aged man with gray hair. I assumed he was a workman, as there was a building that had been having work done to it at the end of the road, so I didn't think too much of it until I watched him snort some sort of substance off the fence barricade next to the road. First red flag. He then made a beeline for us and asked us for some change. I thought that was weird because I still thought he was a workman, but now I can only assume he found the vest from the building that was being worked on and took it, but who knows? As usual, I quickly dropped my usual line of, I'm really sorry, I don't have any change, which is usually the case because I never get money out from the bank and mainly just use card, and I hate ignoring homeless people because it makes me feel super mean. However, this man suddenly starts asking us 1,000,001 questions and walking along beside me. Since it was a while ago, I don't particularly remember everything that was said, but I remember the gist of it. He was asking us where we lived, and because we're not stupid, we pretty much just ignored him. But he was getting more and more insistent, and I was worried about him getting aggressive. So after a few more,
Come on, don't be silly, girls. Where do you live? What's your address?
I decided to reply. I basically was like, oh, I live, insert city name here. Ha. It was an awkward laugh, by the way. I still don't know how to handle these types of situations, and I'm one of those people that laugh at everything, so I think it was probably just to ease the tension. This just seemed to annoy the man, and he once again just called me silly and asked where I lived. At this point, my friend slowly started walking off ahead of me. I wasn't super annoyed at the time, but every time I revisit this story, it irritates me more. So I was more or less stuck with this man now. I kept just dodging the questions, and I think I said something along the lines of, I don't feel comfortable telling strangers my address. I was still super polite, but clearly feeling uncomfortable, and now my friend was at least 10 meters ahead of me. This man goes on to tell me what part of the city he lived in, and again, stop being silly and tell him where I live. I'm not sure how long this went on for, but once he started to get more annoyed at me for not telling him where I lived, he decided to get even creepier. I'd also like to add that we were getting increasingly closer to where I lived, and I was having to think up a plan to not let him see where I lived, as it would be very obvious in the next couple of minutes. The man decides to add,
Well, you don't need to tell me. I work on your building, so I could find your address down to the XYZ. You live up here, don't you? There's a lot of loud music most nights. It's hard for homeless people to sleep because of the loud music, you know?
I'm also certain he doesn't work on my building, as he didn't have the same uniform, and I've never seen him before this situation. Now, I was terrified. A couple nights before this, I heard some people from where I lived talking about how a homeless man had turned up outside, complaining about loud music and threatening people with a knife. I didn't know if anything had been done about that man, so now I was thinking, what if this is the same person? I was preparing to just get stabbed in the middle of this street. I don't remember how I reacted to what the man was saying. I imagined just a lot of, oh, and really. But by some luck, a man walks past me, and the man following me suddenly turns to him asking for money, and I quickly enter my building. I was very relieved since he turned around before I got to the entrance. I didn't even turn back to see what he was doing. I just quickly walked in. Now, if you want to know why my friend walked off, they told me not long after I got in, and we started talking about what had just happened. They told me, well, I thought since I had shopping bags and you had your hands free, If he tried anything, I wouldn't be able to do anything, and you would, so I walked ahead. I know they were scared, but so was I, and surely sticking together in a situation like that is more likely to dissuade someone from anything. Whatever, nothing can be done about it now. I called the police not long after we got in, just to log with them what happened, as I didn't want this man to approach a woman on her own or do something worse. The officer was lovely, but I've never heard anything else about the situation. So yeah, weird man on coke or something? Let's not meet. A few months ago, I was staying in my partner's apartment for a few weeks by myself. I don't quite remember why I was out that late, but it was around 1 a.m. and I just got off transit. Only one other guy got off with me, and he was rather tall and walked briskly. I was ahead of him at first, but he quickly passed me because even though I have a quick stride, I'm pretty short for a guy. I don't normally live in that city, so I'm not sure why, but the streets were incredibly empty. I remember thinking that because there wasn't even a single car on the road. We were literally a 5-minute walk away from a major university, so it was very odd not to see a single person or car. The only lights on were street lights. I've spent nights at my partner's place before, and I never remembered it ever being this dead. Anyways, I had walked down the street and was coming up to an intersection where I had to turn left. I noticed this guy standing around the front of a bank that was on a corner. The guy ahead of me walked by him with no problem and went straight. I was a bit wary, but I didn't think much of him until I was about maybe a meter away, and he had sidestepped to be in front of me and held his arms wide open, grinning at me. I glanced in the direction of the guy who left the train with me, but he was across the street already. My heart was already pounding at this point, and I think I may have started to disassociate from the stress because I can't remember what he looked like, even though I remember looking directly at him. If this sounds like an overreaction, I have a history of multiple cases of CSA by different people and have PTSD, among other mental illnesses I still struggle with. At the time, I was falling back into my disordered eating again and was also underweight, in addition to being short, so definitely not the person you'd expect to win in a fight, and I knew it. I remember being frozen for a moment, and then on instinct, I very politely said, "No thank you," took a step to the right towards the street, and kept walking forward. He moved in front of me again, still with his arms wide open, expecting me to hug him, still grinning. For some reason, I repeated my polite refusal and sidestepped him again, instead of running the opposite direction. Luckily, he let me pass, but I could hear him following me from a short distance. I was wondering what I could do in that moment. I couldn't fight him. There was no one around. If I tried to call someone, he was close enough to grab me, and I wasn't able to run very fast. Suddenly, I hear his steps speed up into a sprint, and before I could react, he slowed down again. I walked a bit faster. He repeated the same thing over and over. I wondered if I should go a different path so he doesn't know where I live. It wasn't the best idea since I didn't know the city well, and he probably knew it better than I did. I decided I knew that I could find help in the lobby at least, compared to if I went somewhere else. He sprinted at me again, and I turned around and loudly asked him, "Do you need help?" I remember not feeling my body and feeling lightheaded from the anxiety. Despite how panicked I felt, my voice came out clearly and I sounded disdainful. I don't think I meant to sound like he was annoying and inconveniencing me, but that's how it came out. Then he spoke for the first time and responded,
"No, do you need help?"
I didn't say anything to that and just turned back around and kept speed walking towards my partner's apartment building. He was still following, but now he was talking. I can't remember much of what he said. I was just focused on getting back without being assaulted. Eventually, I heard him stop walking.
I know I'm scary.
I don't know why he said that. I took the opportunity to put more distance between us and kept speed walking. He didn't keep following me though. He just kept saying, I know I'm scary. He got louder and louder the further I got. I got to the door of the apartment building and I looked back again. He was no longer in sight. I unlocked the door to the building and then ran up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. When I got into the apartment, I went straight to the window because the unit had a large window facing the street. I wanted to see if I could see him. Nothing. The streets were empty. I texted my partner about my experience, but he was already asleep and wouldn't see it. Luckily, I haven't seen that man again, and I hope I never will.